All right, so Coding Jesus posted a follow-up video to his recent video where he code reviewed pirate software, which this was the topic of part of my video that I released late last night. Yes, I'm still in the same shirt because I just went straight to bed, woke up, went back to work. Had all my meetings canceled this morning, which is great. Well, no, they weren't canceled. They're moved to this afternoon. So I have a long evening ahead of me, but I have some free time this morning. So I actually want to watch this and just react to it and see what he has to say.
What is up, guys? Coding Jesus here. Guys, in today's video, I want to review the top contentions that not only pirate software had,
It's got to be OBS and audio sync issues, which I know personally.
but a lot of his fanboys had with my video yesterday, in which
Remember I talked about in the last video, the fanboys. I think the fans are a bigger problem than the actual creator that you're doing a reaction to.
I reviewed the code that he wrote for his game Heartbound. Now, while the video was a stunning success in terms of engagement, there was a couple of themes that kept repeating from detractors that I think are worth addressing in a separate video. So let's get into it.
Okay.
The first claim that I saw time and time again is that your code quality shouldn't matter if you're a solo game dev, and that code quality only somehow matters if you work in a team. Now, you'd think that if you're working on a passion project, you'd be interested in holding yourself to the highest possible standard, since you can make your own decisions, free of any corporate timeline, and not subject to demands of other employees. You know, they say this with such confidence, as if poor code is not going to hold you back in your own development process and you're somehow impervious to the effects of your poor decisions as long as you make those bad decisions yourself. Usually when you work with a team, you can get away with poor code because
So I'm going to agree and disagree here. I get what he's trying to say. It depends on the kind of personal project you're working on. Now, my senior used to teach me the concept of just get it working first and then, make it nice later on. And I'm very honest about this, I've never liked coding. I did like solving problems, learning things, figuring things out. So I knew where I was starting and I knew where I wanted to get to. And then I would just figure it out in the middle. And a lot of times when I'm figuring it out initially, it's going to be very ugly code. Now, it depends on the scale of this personal project. Is this something that's going to be a deliverable, or are you just trying to learn and figure things out? Now, I did a stream a while back where I showed a script about doing image stacking to create like star trail effects. And it was with Python. Now, that script itself has been through like 5 or 6 iterations of design as I've learned and improved upon it. The first iteration is, well, awful. Second one, less awful. Third one, a little bit less awful. I think fourth one got better. Fifth one, a little bit better. Still overall awful. It's always a process. Now, as far as getting away with it on small teams, no, you don't get away with it. Because if you're not doing a good job, then the people on your team are going to come to you with questions. So you're still losing time. Or they're just going to say, wow, he doesn't care, so why should I care? I'm going to do a poor job as well. So either way, you're going to pay for it.
because you won't need to deal with the consequences of that code as you pawn it off to somebody else and
Which I've already just argued against. You will deal with the consequences, maybe indirectly.
work on something totally separate. But as a solo developer, you need to deal with and contend directly with all the trade-offs that you make as you make those decisions while you code your game or your project or your whatever.
So he's not wrong there. I mean, in 2013, after the layoffs, and I've talked about this in previous videos and streams, I went from a team of over a dozen down to just myself. And that was just me for 2 years. And some people were like, wow, that's kind of really cool. You don't have to answer to anyone. You don't have to do code reviews. You can make your own rules. The biggest problem, so 2 big problems I ran into. One is no longer having a team to bounce ideas off of. Sometimes just having a colleague come over to your desk when you're just brain fried on something, you can't get through it, you don't know why you're stuck, having to look at your monitor for 60 seconds to go, oh, why are you doing this? And like, oh my God, right? That's so important. Also, colleagues keep you honest. And I do admit, for about 2 years, just being on my own, and it wasn't because I thought I was smart, because I was working under such tight deadlines, and no one cares in film and animation about code quality. I talked about this in the last video. You're just delivering. So at the end of 2 years, I had to really reflect on my own code and a lot of my design decisions, and I had to pay for it. Spent the next year or two cleaning a lot of it up. I did get a chance to address a lot of stuff that we kept deprioritizing as a team. And now when I had control of priorities, I was able to address it, and that was great. But the manner in which I addressed it, well, there was definitely room for improvement. So I have been on both sides, going from a team to forced to be solo back to a team. And yes, it depends on the environment. If it is professional, semi-professional, something you're a deliverable to a stakeholder, you're going to eventually eat that tech debt, which is going to talk about tech debt in a minute. Now, if it's just something you're doing at home, maybe you do put your code on GitHub, which you talked about GitHub last night, just to store it, but it's just fiddling around, experimentation. In that phase, I wouldn't worry about architecting the perfect code, because if you're so worried about architecting the perfect code, you're going to have a much harder time getting to the end that you're trying to achieve. Get to the end, revisit it. And the problem we ran into in animation is they would say this to you. You'd like, yeah, I got it working, but it's hacky. Like, oh, we'll go back and fix it later. In entertainment, and I bet games is the same way for the most part. Or maybe not as much, right? Because the games do rely on code running, but in film and animation, the final product doesn't care about the code. So I remember we used to say things like, I'm like, yeah, I got it figured out, but it's really hacky. And they said, that's okay. We'll go back and fix it later. And if you got back to fix it later, you were fixing it on the weekends because you chose to go in on your time and resolve it, because you were not being allotted the time at work to fix it. Even though everyone kept complaining about problems that stemmed from your bad decisions when you first built the application. But they'd rather complain about it incessantly than give you the time to go back and architect it correctly. It was very common to deal with people. So someone would come to me and say, hey, how long does it take you to build this? And I'd say 2 weeks. And like, well, that's too long. It's like, well, it's 2 weeks. I'm trying to approach it semi-responsibly, even if it's going to be a little bit hacky, some sense of responsibility, maybe some unit tests. And then I had a colleague who'd be like, I can do it in 2 days, because he always wanted to show me up. And they'd be like, wow, you deliver so fast. So he would deliver it in 2 days, but he would deliver a broken tool and then spend the next 3 or 4 weeks patching it. However, because of boneheaded management, they'd be like, well, he delivers faster. But they would ignore the part where he spent much longer supporting and fixing the script. And actually, he wasn't always fixing the script. I was the one they would call in more often than not to fix the problems in his application. They're like, we can always count on you. I was like, well, why couldn't you count on him to actually build it correctly in the first place? Is it a great car? If you bought a car, if you went out to the car dealership, you ordered a car, and they said, we can only deliver this in 6 months. You're like, no, I want this in 6 weeks. You get in 6 weeks, and you keep going back for the next 2 years having it fixed because it was rushed through production. Is it still a great car? Or would you have rather waited 6 months and had the car built correctly?
In other words, every decision you make will either make life easier for you or harder for you down the line. As technical debt accumulates,
that's life in general. But here he's going to talk about tech debt.
You bear the entire burden of that debt, which slows down development. Now, for those of you who aren't technical debt is a term that refers to the extra work you're going to need to put in down the line because you currently made a decision that was not ideal.
What I was talking about, that guy rushing apps authority so he could finish it in record time, releasing the code. But I would carry the tech debt.
So you are delivering something faster today, only to slow down future delivery tomorrow, the day after, the week after, the month after.
And exactly, because we kept patching. I kept fixing his crap. It slowed down the projects I was already working on.
Etc. It's kind of like a ball.
So when I was saying earlier that your colleagues, you can be slowing down on team projects. He was eventually slowed down because he would need my help on stuff. And I was like, I do not have time. You're not going to get it, which slowed him down.
Ball and chain that's tied around your leg. And every step you take forward, that ball grows and grows and grows, which decreases the velocity of your development. Now, the fact that Heartbound has taken over 8 years to development,
That's a long
and is
time.
still in early access, despite the fact that the game took inspiration from Undertale, which took less time to make and provided more content, is a reflection of the fact that code quality is important and it will stifle your development
I think there's a lot more going on in code quality. It just sounds like overall project management.
if you do not take it seriously. And it's kind of ironic because the same people that are trying to make excuses for poor code are the same people that actually play the game and are expecting features to be delivered.
And they're also the same kind of people that will leave a ton of comments in the code because they're trying to explain their way out of bad code design.
I don't care if his code's poor in the sense that it doesn't impact me directly. Yeah, I might care from a technical perspective to try to reconcile his game development experience or his game industry experience with who he claims to be and what he produces, but I'm not going to play his game. I don't care for his game. And the same people that do care for his game are the same people that say that it's okay for the game code to be slop when in fact they're waiting on those same features that require the game code to be clean in order to develop and do so quickly.
I would the same thing in animation. Oh, it's okay if you just hack out the tool really quickly, but yet they'll complain incessantly when the tool doesn't do what they need it to do. It's inconsistent in its output, has lots of errors, but it was okay for me to push it out ahead of schedule.
Now, I think that my views here can really be summarized in a dialogue that I had with Quinthio when I jumped on his stream yesterday and talked a bit more about the video. The practices that he's employed so far are practices that I'd expect from somebody that watched Khan Academy for a week, not somebody that's been working on a project for 8 years, claims to, worked at Blizzard and been around game devs, or at some certain points claimed that he's a game dev. If he just came and said, this is what I produced, I learned game dev for 1 or 2 weeks, Khan Academy, I spent an hour or two every day, I'd say that's actually good progress. But to come and claim that you're some authority in the space, this is the code you've produced.
That's
to
valid.
me, there is a massive disconnect between what you say you're capable of based off your background and what you've produced. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And
That's definitely valid. What I do see a lot is when people get to a point where how do I explain this? He's not the first one I've seen like this. They get to a point where they've achieved something that they were working towards. And when they get to that point, they're like, I'm good enough for me. Now, I don't know Pirate Software at all. We probably know the same people. Never spoke to him, probably never will. Never worked with him. I've barely watched a few of his streams. I mentioned that in the last video. Didn't seem like my cup of tea, so I never kept following him. So I can't say if he is or isn't arrogant, but I could see an arrogant person not growing. I think with coding, it's always an evolution. Even though I don't consider myself I'm not a software engineer anymore. I'm a systems engineer, or engineering manager. I don't do anything technical anymore. I do project management and manage people all the time. But I still find code to be an ongoing process of learning. I'm still learning things that are new in the latest versions of Python. That didn't exist when I got into Python back in version 2 point whatever, many years ago. And I still go fiddle with it. I've watched a few more of Coding Jesus videos. And I was like, oh, I really, he's younger than me, doesn't have the same experience. It doesn't mean, just because he's younger than me and maybe not as many years experience doesn't mean that he has less knowledge. He actually has a lot of insight. And I did learn a lot watching him. It's always an evolution. And you can't, how did a friend describe it to me once? He goes, you are not your code. Stop making your code your identity. Just learn. Be humble, learn. And if Pirate wasn't learning, he just got to a certain point and he stayed at that point and he doubled down on that point, I can see how that would rub people the wrong way. Because that's annoying, period, in a personality. It's even worse when you have to work with someone that's like that.
I think that really comes down to the heart of this critique of that claim, and that is that Pirate Software is constantly portraying himself as this sort of expert authority on everything that's wrong about nothing. And
I haven't watched enough of his content to agree or disagree with that, but if that's the case, okay.
and uses all this hyperbolic language and associations when in reality, what he's tangibly produced is below what you'd expect from a junior developer or even an intern.
People call me the Bob Ross of programming, which I think is a pretty big honor because I like Bob Ross's stuff.
Here, for example, he didn't say directly, I'm Bob Ross. He said, everybody thinks I'm Bob Ross of programming. What does that mean? It's trying to paint the picture that there's a broad consensus that you are the best developer out there and you are the go-to guy for anything related to game programming, which is his niche.
I guess for me, if someone had said that about me, I was like, please don't insult Bob Ross. I've said it again, and I'll say it right now. I have years of Python experience, but I would not classify myself as a good Python programmer, much less somebody you should really come to for advice. You know, and people, when I kind of went viral and people learned about me and where I worked at, they thought I would be a great source of knowledge how to get into the animation industry. And I've had to tell people I'm probably, I've gone over the process of how I got in the industry. There's no recipe to it, but I'll have enough humility to say, like, I am not probably the best person you should look up to, especially for technical skills. Maybe work ethic. I'm not saying best, but my work ethic, where I would just stop at nothing to solve a problem. And I would solve the problem. Now, the code that I wrote to solve the problem would be abysmal, and I admit that. But for the people I was working for, they didn't care about the code quality. They just cared that I solved the problem. And that's what I was good at. But that doesn't mean I was a good programmer.
You're a hacker. Like that's where you like kind of started.
Actual hacker.
An actual hacker. Like,
Yes,
not like
yes.
I'm a hacker. No, you're an actual
That's not
hacker.
kidding.
You've
Yeah.
won.
Like an actual hacker.
Yeah,
Yeah, my last job was hacking power plants for the federal government. I
Yeah.
worked for the United States Department of Energy.
So
Just
a dude walks in with a
and
laptop and a suit, and you lean
Yeah.
over to, who's that guy?
So he apparently worked for the federal government, hacking power plants. Okay, this is the first I've really heard about this.
Well, that's the hacker from the
Yeah,
government.
that's the hacker.
It's even worse because we go in like
Like
3 to
what?
4 man teams, man. So like we've got a team. Of
Oh, you
dudes
had a
looking
fleet.
Like
You had
this.
like a team of
Yeah.
dudes in
It
suits
wasn't just
holding
me.
laptops,
Yeah,
walking into
exactly.
restricted areas. Okay.
When he says things like this, what he's trying to paint in your mind as a viewer is that he's some sort of Unit 8200 Mossad agent writing zero-day exploits on USBs that are snuck into Iranian nuclear facilities and that infest and shut down the entire technical operation of that nuclear power plant.
My take on this is if someone that does that kind of work, and again, I don't know enough to say that he's lying. I don't have any receipts, any evidence, but I do know some people that have done a lot of work for the federal government, both in like the law enforcement capacity, people I was in the military with, and people I know from the technical side have done a lot of work. They're under a lot of NDAs. They don't talk openly about where they work or what they did. Partly because they want to get rehired. Maybe they're just contractually bound to keep their mouths shut.
When in reality, if you look at his LinkedIn and reconcile it against his skill set, what he did was social engineering. He wrote phishing emails and tried to gain access to credentials and user systems that way.
So know before. Okay, if you use know before a job, it is a service that we use to send out phishing emails to our employees to test. They're always being tested all the time.
And so all this really culminates in the disconnect between who Thor plays himself up to be and then what he can produce. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that his GitHub is also totally empty. It's empty because he has nothing to show for his
I tore this up in the last video, and I will stand by my disagreement with using his GitHub. Activity does not equate to value. And if you didn't watch that last video, to summarize, I think there's a lot of reasons for this. One, all his work could be in a private repository, so you won't see any of the activity and those little squares light up with green dots. You can see activity based on private repos if you enable an option that is off by default. Also, I suspect too, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, and this is where people will get mad, that he may have another GitHub under a different name, but he reserved this one, Pirate Software, to reserve the name. I can say from experience, when I blew up just a few thousand subs, last summer, some people out there were trying to impersonate me. And I've talked to other people who've dealt with this too, like on different social media platforms. They will clone your content and take your avatar and they'll upload it somewhere else and just try to hijack your identity. So it would not surprise me is when he started his little persona of Pirate Software, if he went and created this account just to sit on the name so he owns the identity. That would be a smart thing to do. Also, if he did work for the government or anything like that, he probably was required to make a different account. If they even used GitHub, they might have used something else or had an internal code repository. I think that's more likely. There are more places to store your code than GitHub. And I said in my last stream, I have a personal GitHub. It's not very active. My work GitHubs, I've had 3 different GitHub accounts for my jobs. I always use different GitHub accounts for companies I work in. And none of those you would see any activity posted because I would never enable the option to show my activity even on private repos. It's nobody's business on the outside what I'm doing for my employer. So I will stand by, I will double, quadruple down on the argument that using his GitHub repo is a very weak argument. Everything else I agree with that they're talking about, but this is a nothing burger in my honest opinion.
20 years of experience as a veteran in the space. Now, Pirate himself
Also, in my last video, I shared a video of 2 R&D engineers from ILM who specialize in physics simulations getting Oscars about 10 years ago. Very credible people. Everyone in the company knows who they are, or they were in the company. They got Oscars. They have numerous film credits. You will not find them on GitHub anywhere. But that does not invalidate their actual work and experience. They're both brilliant, one of which I've worked closely with. So let's get off the GitHub thing, honestly.
also responded, and he got a bit hung up on the fact that my mouse had some variable highlighted, despite the fact that I never talked about that variable. It's actually quite funny because I refer to every variable other than the one that he referred to in his reply.
Coding Jesus, this was a very good point that he made in this part of the video. I agreed with everything he said.
But skipping over that, he makes the claim that you can't define a Boolean in GameMaker because GameMaker itself doesn't have a native Boolean type in its scripting language. In other words, it interprets reals as Booleans. Now, to reconcile the fact that he used a Boolean in his code with what he said, I decided to do what any developer would do, and that is I consulted the documentation. So if you go to data types in GameMaker, oh, look at that. You are also provided with constants, true and false, which can always be used in your code to prevent any issues.
Right there.
Should
Good one.
The native Boolean type be defined later. So GML defines constants true as 1 and false as 0. And the documentation itself even recommends that you use true and false instead of reals in case that association between a Boolean and a real ever gets changed to a Boolean and some other native definition of a Boolean. So in other words, if they ever replace the aliasing of bools for reals with bools for actual bools, they recommend that you use true and false. But we know he's not going to concede on this point or admit the fact that he was wrong, given his track record. So let's move on to the next claim. Another comment that I've seen...
Yeah, he could have just said it's personal preference and just admitted maybe it's not good practice. And that probably would have diffused the whole argument. It's like, yeah, you're right. You know, you should use bools and I work like this, but maybe it's not the best practice. I think that right there probably could have diffused a little bit of the critique, not all of it.
Is that you've never worked with GameMaker, so you must not know what you're talking about. Another equally absurd variant of this is what he's writing is not C++, or anybody who has worked with technology or more than one programming language understands that languages are just toolkits. Each
Correct.
toolkit is uniquely positioned to solve a
Some are more annoying than others, to be honest.
given problem. Now, while there might be unique features in every toolkit, essentially there's a lot of overlap. Okay? An integer in one language is going to be very similar to an integer in another. Every
Yes.
language is going to have for loops, etc., etc. So while
When I interviewed at Google, they said if I got the job, which I didn't, they said I'd be working in C, but they actually allow you to go through the interview exam using any language you're comfortable with, because they said it's more important to see your overall approach to coding, which, as he's pointing out, a lot of the same general rules, principles apply no matter what language. And that's how I am when I've interviewed people. I didn't, I had one guy, what language was he showing me? I can't remember, but it wasn't, I mean, I'm a Python guy, but he was demonstrating some script he was working on. I think he was using Rust, but I could still read it and I understood the logic. And most importantly, I was more interested in how he explained his decision-making process when he wrote the app.
while the actual toolkit might be different, the same principles, patterns, and design decisions should apply in large
Yes.
part to any problem that you're trying to solve. The only difference is
Exactly.
the tools that you use to solve that problem are going to be a little different. What does that look like in practice? Take that code snippet, alarm 0 equals 0, alarm 1 equals 0.
We
1,
talked
2
about
equals
this
0.
one.
You don't need to copy and paste that code every single time. I'd expect an intern or somebody learning code in Khan Academy to copy and paste. You can simply replace that all with a for loop. So what does it say about somebody that they haven't even considered to use a for loop for something as simple as this?
That's a
If
good
there's
point.
something that I regret, it's not being able to provide more sub.
I think we was talking about iterating because if it's, how big was that? So 6 indices. So if this is just a 6 indice long list and you're setting it all to 0, you could just iterate over the length of the list and just set everything to 0. Now he's right on that. That would make far more sense.
Something as simple as this. If there's something that I regret, it's not being able to provide more substantive feedback. If you look at plenty of my other videos where I do a code review, I go into line by line the GitHub repository and break it down for my viewers, both saying what went well and what didn't go well and how can it be improved. But Thor didn't give me or really anybody the chance to do that with his code because all he does is share snippets and screenshots. You also shouldn't be representing an entire entity made up of health, position, maybe whether they're dead or alive, their ID, their inventory as a number.
Yeah.
Or an index into some array.
Which we
That's
talked
not how
about
you
that.
present character models or entities in game design. And I don't even need to be a game developer to understand that. I just watch 1 or 2 videos.
We covered that in the
of
last video.
Churro, and I already know that's the case. So hopefully you guys found this video informative or interesting. I'm going to now move on to other news. So unless anything new comes out that I think I can bring my unique perspective to, I'm going to put Pirate Software behind me and just keep moving forward.
No, I would expect nothing less. There's a saying that says, if you speak ill of me, it's because if you speak of yourself, nobody will listen. Now, I understand why he made his initial video in this response, but there is that YouTube thing when someone has a bad take and everyone just doubles down and quadruples down and keeps making content about that person. Who was that guy a few months ago? Sun Studios or something like that. I guess he had a take about the Switch that people didn't like, and then content creators just ganged up on him for weeks and weeks on end, to the point where they thought they pushed him into a mental breakdown, and then they were proud about that. My opinion is because they have nothing else to talk about. They just love trolling other creators. Now, I've viewed some of Coding Jesus videos, and yeah, you know what? He has a lot more to offer his viewers than just arguing with another content creator. He does really understand code. He understands design. If you're trying to learn more about programming, he's a much better source of information than I ever could be. And he probably just would get burned out on arguing with Pirate Software. So no, I respect that. Get back to what you're really good at and what your followers want to see and why they followed you in the first place. But that is my 2 cents. Overall, I still agree with what he says, but I still will double down on the whole GitHub activity thing is a nothing burger. I think they have plenty of other ammo to use. They don't need to try to use the GitHub account. It adds nothing. In fact, I think it takes away, in my opinion, a little bit from their argument. Well, that's all I have for this video. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again next time. Bye.